Imagine for a moment if your entire life you repressed something dark within you because societal values told you to be something else. You tried and tried to be what you thought the world wanted, but you fell short every time. But then, suddenly, the entire world has their eyes on you. They love you, or it feels like they do. They don't know you, but for once it seems like someone accepts you. For the first time, it feels like this dark part of you is rewarded. You're allowed to be yourself. No one's ever idolized you like they do now. It's like anything you could say would result in erupting applause, but it's not you they love, rather it's this idea of something that you represent. Folie is never meant to happen. According to Todd Phillips, the director, Joker was a standalone movie with no plans for a sequel, but he had to clarify this after instigating sequel rumors himself when he said that if Joaquin Phoenix and Warner Brothers wanted a sequel, then he wouldn't be opposed. Joker was originally pitched as a character study, separate from the DC universe. Todd Phillips shot down any inquiries suggesting we would see Arthur Fleck go head-to-head with Robert Pattinson's Batman. It was never a story meant to be about the action, per se, but rather the psychology of what pushes a man to the brink.
It's fun to say, well, why is he like that? What made him like that? And that's ultimately really what the goal of the movie. It's not this gigantic statement on the world today, and there is stuff thematically in there, but really it's like, what makes somebody that way?
Is it just me? Or is it getting crazier out there?
The mental health aspect was a huge selling point for the first movie for me.
When I first walked into that theater, my friends and I went with anticipation, fully expecting to see incel nonsense.
I was ready to point and laugh, and while it didn't hit emotionally for my friends, I sat there in awe. Maybe because my psyche was rather fragile at the time. My mental health was at an all-time low, my faith in the system was non-existent, and so I saw myself in Arthur Fleck. The depiction of mental illness hit a bit too close to home. The second movie saw that all fall flat. Joker 2 walks a fine line between blaming Arthur's actions on an evil personality and making social commentary on parasocial infatuations with idols. But both perspectives are lukewarm ideas at best. It doesn't take a definitive stance towards saying that Arthur actually does have DID, but it narratively heavily relies on the idea, even if just in a metaphorical sense. It's no secret to anyone in my life that dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder, being used as a plot device in most scenarios drives me crazy. I've worked in mental health for a long time, studied the field for even longer, so it's a bit of a sore spot for me. That being said, I understand the base concept behind using it for this movie, even if I'm getting sick of Hollywood using mentally ill people as a villain-shaped punching bag. Narratively, it fits well enough. Arthur's team try for the insanity defense, which, contrary to popular belief, is not something easy to achieve. You'd have to prove Arthur had no comprehension of right or wrong at the time of the crime. Arthur experiences maladaptive daydreaming, which can look like psychosis, but is just a mostly self-harming coping mechanism.
He'd gone off his meds due to government funding cuts.
He was fired, his mother died, all stressors that could result in his actions.
Which isn't justification, but rather an indication of his mindset at the time.
You could make a good case, but they refer to DID as multiple personality disorder, which is a misleading name because it's not a personality disorder which affects how you see yourself and form relationships with others, but it's a dissociative disorder developed in childhood to shield the self from trauma. Multiple personality disorder was renamed dissociative identity disorder in 1994 to reflect this. Joker Folie takes place around 1985. The facts surrounding mental illness are dated in this movie, which I can let slide since it takes place in the 80s, but I feel conflicted because while I'm somebody who knows that being mentally ill doesn't automatically make you dangerous, impressionable viewers might not. In my last video, I referenced the Jaws effect. I don't expect media or artists to hold the hand of the viewer when it comes to morality. I don't think necessarily that Steven Spielberg should have made a PSA to inform the public that sharks aren't inherently dangerous. I do believe, however, that the impact of our words should be considered. I'm not asking for a PSA before the title.
I'm not asking for the information portrayed to be up to date with the DSM-5 even.
I'm just saying, I've seen a lot of people who are afraid to seek help because they're afraid of what society will think about the labels. With a character study to this scale, the choice to use outdated information needs to be handled very carefully.
I'm saying that at the same time that I found the first Joker to be an immaculate character study.
Character development is an important element of screenwriting. I can't think of a movie where the main character stays the same all the way through. That's not to say it can't be done. In the original Joker, ask yourself what his development was. He starts as hopeful. Even if beaten down, he wants to be rescued. He wants to take his meds and talk to his therapist and work his job and take care of his mother. And by the end, he has nothing left to lose. He resents his mother and Murray and the society he tried so hard to be a part of. Character development. It's not that character development wasn't established in Joker 2, it's just that it was misplaced.
Joker 2 opens with an Arthur downbeaten and hopeless, negating the end of the first movie, which saw him freed from societal expectations and morality.
Negating even the opening animated scene, which I did really like, but it saw him reveling in his newfound stardom. I can see his relationship with Lee as a metaphor for his fame and say that's why he was such a shell of a man in the beginning, so that she could bring him out, but that's some reaching, or it's just the writers needing a reason why Arthur would fall prey to Lee so easily. It's more of a hammer over your head of what the first movie wants you to know. Arthur is sad and pathetic, end of story. Even if Arthur is wrong for everything he did, the entire movie served as a build-up to that moment when the world around Arthur can't hold the weight anymore and everything buckles. The audience understands why he does what he does. In the sequel, we watch Arthur circle the drain for 2 hours and 17 minutes, which isn't exactly enticing.
There's only so much emotional torture porn you can watch before it starts to get tedious.
What should have happened is the movie starting on a high note. Arthur fully invested in his role as Joker, thinking he had an adoring fan base when actually people only loved the idea he represented. And one by one, pieces of Arthur's new shell are stripped away until he's left bare before the audience in the courtroom. This is clearly what they tried to do, only they can't start on a high note because Arthur needs to be at his lowest point so that he can fall for Harley. Do you see the issue?
This movie skirted around classifying itself as a love story, which I don't mind.
I don't mind a lot of the elements in this movie. I think the musical concept plays well with the maladaptive daydreaming and the grandiosity.
I think the conversation surrounding the idea of who Arthur is versus who he actually is being portrayed through a romantic lens could have been really impactful.
I think the animated intro is really good and serves as the best example in this movie of what they wanted to accomplish, but
there's too many buts.
It follows a 3-act structure fit with a climax, but it was underwhelming. 99% of this movie saw Arthur in a courtroom, his jail cell, or singing a duet with Lee. So what is Arthur's development in Joker 2? He dies. So, that's development, I guess.
I'm not one to say that art has to conform to the rules always, but they exist as an important guideline because, for the most part, they work.
If you were to cut out 70% of the musical scenes in this movie, you would lose nothing, because generally they all serve to reinforce the same point. Arthur's sense of identity, the parasocial role an audience plays, and his idealistic relationship with Lee.
The music wasn't bad, but for the most part I found the songs all blending together. Lady Gaga intentionally downplays her voice, which works as a character choice, but
for a movie so focused on the musical aspect, to have the two leads not sing to a Broadway standard for an uncomfortably long amount of time makes the experience grating. If she's dead set on that character choice, I would want the musical portions to be substantially cut down, but as it stands, the musical numbers go on for far too long for a performance that is subpar.
There was cool imagery, the acting was good, the hints of themes that were there were cool concepts. I like the musical aspect being a way to present his disconnect from reality, but I'm confused on what the audience was supposed to take from this. In the first Joker, what is the audience meant to feel? We're meant to come to an understanding of why Joker becomes who he is. We're meant to, in a guilty way, empathize with his actions.
What conclusion is the audience meant to draw in Joker Folie Deux? We already empathize with Arthur. We already understand him.
From the beginning, we already understand that the love he's receiving from Lee and the protesters isn't real love.
The audience's experience does not change throughout the movie.
While I complain about the torture porn element, I only complain in that it's one note.
Self-classified disturbing movies too often assume that to make me feel disturbed, you need the worst possible thing to happen to the characters, but that's not all you have to do. I have to see myself in the character. I have to feel myself in the universe they exist in. You need to make me feel empathy for them, but we know Arthur's miserable.
We know all of the horrible things that have happened to him, and it seems to never end, so you know what my brain does? It shuts it all out. But yes, while horrible things happen to Arthur on paper, when given the opportunity to push the viewing experience over the edge, Todd Phillips backs away.
There is what's implied to be a sexual assault scene.
It's supposed to be Arthur's lowest point, except
when my friend saw it, she was confused about what the scene was even meant to be. I'm not someone to demand brutality of that nature, even if with this and long legs I give off that vibe. But my issue with that is that Arthur is already broken. He's already had the worst things imaginable happen to him. For what reason now am I expected to be distraught any more so than usual? You didn't even have the balls to show me what happened to him. How has anything changed? You cannot show me a character breaking when he's been breaking for 2 feature-length films now. While you watched this movie, you kept expecting something to happen.
You thought maybe he would escape prison with Lee. You thought maybe he would incite a prison riot.
But none of this happened. I think a more fitting ending would be the climax being the rape scene, which needs to be brutal to represent the tone, or it could be severely altered to fit his disconnect with reality. And after his breakdown in court, which needs serious revision to exhibit a better lack of identity and pressure to be what society expects of him.
Lee leaving is more dramatized, and her point of Arthur failing to live up to her expectations is made then, because
this movie wants to be a faux love story, right? Then tell the love story. Be dramatic.
So imagine she leaves, and Arthur is sentenced to death, and he calls her to come and just sit in the audience. He gets the chair. Lee doesn't come. His death incites new riots. You could also add the bombing scene to the day he's scheduled for the chair to show this cycle of him being a pawn in society, if you're feeling nasty.
But personally, I do prefer Arthur Fleck dying.
I can think of several routes I would have preferred this movie take, rather than the anticlimactic mess we got.
But if I were given the riding reins on Joker Folie, it wouldn't have been made.
It's a pointless sequel.